Fit fans, we're back from a little break. Hello, Meredith.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
Fabulous. And so glad to see you and welcome
So glad to see you.
phenomenal guest today, Brad Schoenfeld, PhD in exercise science. Welcome to Peach Pit Fitness.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, my absolute pleasure. So I'll get right to it. We have a two-part episode as usual. And this first part is, a conversation really more about me and Meredith picking your brain about so much of the work that you've done. And it's all fascinating to us. So buckle up, guys. Let's go. So Brad, your name and hypertrophy are synonymous to pretty much most of my sphere of exercise and fitness. And I just really want to hear it from you. Like, I have my reasons, but why is this a worthy focus of study?
Well, I mean, I don't think we could take up the whole half hour just discussing that, but I think the short course is that, first of all, hypertrophy is something that many, if not the majority of people who are coming to personal trainers are aspiring to. When I was a personal trainer, the vast majority of my clientele, they were not looking to take a second off their sprint time or to jump an inch higher, which was the majority of strength and conditioning research. They were looking to look great naked, which turned out to be my website. And specifically, it was increasing muscle size was a primary consideration. I was a former bodybuilder and have over the years worked with many high-level bodybuilders. So, I mean, it's something that is of interest to people. And I will also say that there's a correlation between hypertrophy and strength. So increasing hypertrophy can lead to greater strength. Muscle is an endocrine organ. It secretes various substances that have positive benefits on health. And I could go on. But the other thing is, that's my focus. So I do what I research what I like. So that's how I ended up here.
I just wanted to highlight hypertrophy is one of the causes of looking good naked.
Not everybody gets that though. And I'm curious to ask you questions about that. But Jen, continue.
About nakedness?
No. Oh gosh. Well, no, not specifically that, but yes. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, you mean our perception of hypertrophy?
Yes. And like how that for some people could be scary.
Yeah.
Specifically when you're working with, and I don't mean to generalize, but like oftentimes women are afraid of the word even like building, not all women, of course. And certainly this could be an issue for men too, although I don't see it as much there, but just in a lot of your studies, like the one that we were going to maybe speak on with the full range of motion versus partial range of motion training, you used all female subjects. And I was curious if you have like what kind of intake you have, questionnaires you ask them to get an understanding of their psychological, their mindset coming into a program like that or into a study like the one that you did.
Well, I mean, that's not a focus. That's not an outcome of these studies that certainly that study you're referring to, and often not really in the focus of my research. I don't recall if we've done any psychological testing in that realm on women, but I think more importantly, or just as importantly to answer your question, that is one of the reasons why it's been very difficult to do hypertrophy research in women. Because we have a flyer that's ended up gain muscle, and women are like, I want to lose fat.
Right.
So when I say I'm overgeneralizing now, but I've tried to carry out studies, and I'm doing my best now to try to integrate because it's a very understudied population. The vast majority of studies in hypertrophy are in men, and a lot of it has to do with the difficulty in getting samples. And I know I'll talk like when I put my stuff out online, women will say, oh, I would volunteer. Well, I mean, I'm at a school and we can only recruit from if they're in California or in Nebraska. I'm not going to be able to have them in New York in a study. So I can just tell you it is difficult. The study you're referring to is carried out in Brazil. And they were able to, my colleagues were able to recruit a sufficient sample, which was good. But it is a difficult chore. And one of my life's, a substantial part of my life's work is to dispel the myth that women are going to look too bulky from resistance training and that adding muscle, it just doesn't happen. You know, the people or women will look at bodybuilders, female bodybuilders in magazines or something and think that's what they're going to look like. And, you know, besides the fact that they have elite genetics, these women, they're also generally taking certain substances that enhance that ability. So again, women, if the addition of resistance training will only help women's physiques and generally improve their self-esteem. And I've been a huge champion of that and trying to instill that or debunk the myth and instill the importance of it in society.
Well, thank you. And
yes, Jen and I love that.
Yeah, that was one of our discussion points between the two of us, and why it was, you know, just a joy to be able to like gather some thoughts and get to be in this room with you, right? So what is like the potential like future look like for women-specific training research?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, I think the future looks like we need to carry out more studies in women. So when you say, what does it look like? As I mentioned, it's an understudied population, and I think it is, it goes hand in hand with making women understand that not only aren't they going to look like a she-man from the Amazon, you know, if they resistance train, it's going to help them. They will look more attractive in general. And I mean, of course, that is subjective to what people think, but it certainly is not going to make them look bulky the way that women think it will. And that it has huge health implications. The addition of muscle, I mentioned some of that earlier, I touched on it, and that particularly for women, that resistance training has, in my opinion, even more important than for men, because women start out with lower bone density, they have smaller joints in general as on average, they're more prone to osteoporosis, more prone towards frailty.
Yeah.
Well, heart disease, that's not as much a resistance training. There's some evidence of that, but frailty, I'm talking about more from a functionality standpoint. So women generally will, because again, of the smaller bone structure and muscle, they're going to get sarcopenia to a greater degree, which is an age-related loss of muscle. Anyway, this is a mindset we need to change, and that will help to drive more research. You know, basically it's chicken or the egg. The egg is the getting women, I think, to understand that this is beneficial for them. And then we could start driving more research, which again will cyclically enhance that whole process.
Yeah, well, thank you. And where, like, one of our missions really with this podcast, like, is to really speak to that problem and, you know, go in between where the evidence is, what it's telling us, and what our Instagram scrolling is telling us, and to be able to meet people in the middle and help them ask better questions and then lead themselves into the right direction. And actually that direction was probably going to be some of your research. So that's just, you know, so it's amazing to, you know, hear that from, you know, you doing the research in the field. Where are, besides your lab, what other labs are doing research on women in training?
I mean, I don't know offhand of a lab that's focusing on that. There's some, you know, a kind of question I'd have to think about it, but I mean, I know a lot of groups are trying to, and that, but like I said, I just a guess based on my knowledge of the literature, we probably have 80% of the hypertrophy work. I will say that the last few studies from our lab we've started to integrate men and women, because it's difficult for me to get, in at least at my school, enough women to carry out a study just on women, but we're integrating where we're carrying out research that includes both men and women. And we're trying to subanalyze, but a lot of times there isn't enough women in the cohort to subanalyze. But what I would say is that I think this is probably a good thing. From what we know, there really does not seem to be much difference, with a few exceptions, in terms of the responses from women and men. So women and men tend to respond fairly equally, similarly to resistance training protocols. There's a couple of things that have been shown that I think have some potential practical importance, including that women seem to recover better. They seem to tolerate more repetitions to a greater extent. So they tend to not to fatigue as quickly, more into fatigue.
That's an interesting one.
Because they've had to be. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. I saw on your ResearchGate that there was a pilot study with resistance training and like periodizing around the menstrual cycle. And it looked like that one, there was not much of a difference in the periodization as well. And that's one of the big myths. One of the big things I see on my Instagram is these posts trying to convince people to like change all of their training based on cycles.
Yeah, it's a great question. Now, again, that study speaks to the difficulty, and it becomes even more difficulty in recruiting. And it becomes even more difficult with something like that, because there's a lot of problems with trying to set up a study that is based around menstrual cycle, just its methodological issues that make it difficult to carry out that research. But here's what I can say, this is anecdotal, and I think it needs more research, but I was a personal trainer before I became a researcher educator for many years. And my experience is that the differences in response to how women respond to training during and around their menstrual cycle is extremely varied. Some women have no issues whatsoever, and other women have major issues where they would basically not be able to train properly. And I have a lot of, I'm talking about training hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women. So a lot of experience in this area, which again, when you're dealing with small studies, I'm not sure we would get the power to understand these things, to get enough subjects to really get the insights into individual differences. But that does speak to the fact that I don't think, I'm not sure that a research study would probably provide the insights that we're looking for there, because ultimately it's going to come down to the individual. If you are someone who gets a lot of cramps and just has issues and you're fatigued during your period, you probably want to program around that. And then for other women who there's no issue whatsoever, there's not an issue. So again, there are certain things I think that there certainly are obvious limitations to research. And we need to understand those limitations and not just take that, well, research says this, so I'm going to do this. Research says something, but that's going to provide you guidelines. And then you have to look at inter-individual variability. And ultimately, everything comes down to programming for the individual.
Yeah, flipping great point there. I saw a lot of variations when I was coaching women's soccer and doing strength and conditioning with women's soccer. And yeah, it just felt like you're in a ping ball. What was that video?
Ping pong.
Yeah.
Pinball.
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 Yeah, it was just, they would just have all kinds of different responses and things to say at different times of the week and day and month. It was, yeah. So yeah, bringing back some memories there. Okay. And Meredith, do you have any questions? I wanted to move on to
No, I mean, I think that this is all such great information for people too. It's right down to, it really comes down to the individual, and like anybody who's listening to this should keep that in mind. You can read a research study and you can have information, but it's information that still has to be applied to you as a specific individual. So Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and I to just further that, it certainly, number one, it's going to depend on the topic too, that certain topics are going to be much less applicable to being able, research would have more applicability to certain topics than it would to others. But regardless, you always want to, if possible, take research as a first line because it's objective. There's a lot of subjectivity in terms of, I feel this more or whatever, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to give you better results. Where people could think they're told something by some bro in the gym, and they think that because bro in the gym who gets really good results is doing it, I'm going to get good results, and there's confirmation bias there. There's a placebo effect. So we need to take the evidence, what we know, but then always in an applied science such as exercise and nutrition as well, is to take that information and then say, all right, how do I respond as an individual? Because virtually almost every topic, you're going to see fairly wide inter-individual responses. And some people are at this part of the curve, some people are at this part of the curve. And depending upon where you are, that's going to dictate what you want to do.
Awesome. Okay, so I'd like to move on to this partial range of motion, full range of motion subject. And that is, well, so the paper that we both read through was the 2021 published in the European Journal of Sports Science on knee extension in a partial range of motion, mostly lengthened position, comparing it to a full range of motion knee extension. And you guys looked at vastus lateralis and rectus femoris as if there was a difference in hypertrophy in those muscles following, like, I don't know, what was it, like 8 weeks or so of training. I was personally fascinated by this, and we just have a lot of things and questions about it. But I guess a good way to start is like, what were some of your takeaways from that research?
Yeah, I think the most important takeaway is that when you train the leg muscle, the quad muscles in a lengthened position, meaning the initial part of the repetition. So let's say a leg extension, the full repetition is from 100 degrees. So of knee flexion, where your knee is flexed. So here's your knee. This would be like 100 degrees of knee flexion to full extension, which is 0 degrees. So when you're training in the initial phase, which would be, let's say, 100 degrees to 50 degrees or so, first 50 degrees of range of motion, it has more anabolic effects. So you will get greater muscle development from doing that part of the rep than if you do the final part of the rep. And what actually seems to be that it, at least in the leg extension, at certain points in the muscle, it had even greater effects than doing through a full range of motion. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily do a full range of motion, and you should only focus on that because I'll give you two things. Number one, it doesn't have to be an either or. So people look at a research study and say, you're looking at this versus that versus this. So if this got better results, I should do this. Well, that's doesn't necessarily follow that you only should be doing that. You could do some long length, some stretch position, and then you could do some full range. There is evidence that training through a full range of motion is optimal for strength gains. So across the range of motion. So basically, strength gains are specific to the range of motion that you train in. Mm-hmm. So if you're training through a shortened range of motion, you're going to get your maximal strength gains will be in the range of motion that you're training in. And as you're getting to, let's say, if you're just doing it in that initial phase, you're not going to gain as much strength in the rest of the range of motion. So that in itself, from a functional standpoint, from a strength-related standpoint, you'd want to do full range. And there can be, like I said, we didn't look at it, but could there be benefits from combining ranges of motion? And that, well, we did actually, interesting. We looked at, this was one of the few studies that looked at a combination. We looked at doing some full range and then some shortened range. And that actually showed really good benefits. And we didn't look at doing some some full range, some lengthened range and then full range. So anyway, there's different permutations that can be done. And I think the evidence that we had certainly showed that a combination may help to optimize hypertrophy.
Brad,
Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
ask a
Meredith.
question? I was just wondering, how did you determine 0 degrees of, or I'm sorry, 100 degrees of knee flexion to 30 degrees of knee flexion? Why didn't you go, assuming that the participants were able to go to full extension, why wasn't that included? Why did it stop at 30 degrees of knee flexion?
I don't, it's been a while, so it's been 2 years since we actually got that published. I don't remember, did we not go to 0? I thought we did go to 0.
I think it went, the final range of motion was 65 to 30. And I was just wondering, because if somebody had more knee flexion than 100 degrees, if you're trying to assess like the lengthened position, I just didn't know if there was a, and these were untrained subjects, to my understanding. So
Correct.
maybe you wouldn't want them to go through that range. Maybe those ranges are a little more like precarious.
I don't recall. I mean,
Okay.
I remember
I was
being
just curious.
on the initial discussion about that. So I collaborated with a group in Brazil
Okay.
on that study. And I don't recall when we had discussed the methods, why that was the case. I'd have to go back.
That's okay. I just was curious. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and I saw something you posted today with a tricep medial and lateral head. I think this kind of, it was interesting because there was hypertrophy gains found throughout both heads, even though it was trained at the lengthened position. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So the study looked at doing an overhead tricep extension where basically the arm is elevated and you do an extension that way versus like a push down where the elbows are at your sides. And it was really interesting. It was a study out of Japan, really fascinating finding. So I don't know how much geeky science you want to go into, but when
All of it.
We love it. Yeah.
There's a force length curve, or length tension curve, and there's something called the ascending limb and the descending limb. And when the sarcomeres work on what's called the descending limb of that strength curve, which is in the stretch, it benefits from training in a stretch position essentially. And when it works on the ascending limb, the initial part, it would seemingly not. But interestingly, the long head of the triceps works on the descending limb, so it makes sense that would have beneficial hypertrophic effects in the overhead extension, and it did show better results in the overhead extension versus the push down. However, it also showed better results for the other 2 tricep heads as well, which was unexpected. We would have expected really no difference because it's working on the ascending limb and thus seemingly wouldn't benefit from the stretch there.
That's cool.
We could, and there was no mechanistic data done to really try to find out why. There could be physiological factors. I think the authors speculated there may be more metabolic stress involved, could be greater hypoxia. We're just not sure. But it was just really interesting. And I think the takeaway, which I did post on my Instagram page, people can check that out if they want. But what I would say the biggest take home is that the overhead tricep extension, it should be an essential exercise in someone's routine if their goal is to maximize muscle hypertrophy. Now, with that said, it doesn't mean that you don't get hypertrophy of the long head and the lateral and medial heads with a push down. It was just greater. The hypertrophy was greater with the overhead extension in all 3 heads of the triceps.
Well, couldn't it be that the long head of the tricep is in a more lengthened position when we're here versus here where it may be have more slack because of it being a 2 joint muscle, so that maybe the lateral medial head could be in a better position to like make that motion happen? Maybe. I don't know.
That is I believe the authors speculated that might be the case too, but that also goes against the fact that there's greater hypertrophy in the long head as well. So if the long head is not being able to carry out as much action, then why did it get greater hypertrophy? Now,
Gotcha.
perhaps that could be attributed to the passive elements. Again, now we're getting into real geeky speculation, which I'm not sure in a consumer podcast we want to do, but
it's really interesting.
It is I think a possible theory or a possible hypothesis that can be furthered.
Cool.
It's exciting.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Meredith? I think it's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, well, I think you have one more question that you wanted to ask about the 90s. Oh, I do have one question too, though,
Of
because like
course.
you're a New York City person, Brad. And so I was just curious, do you have a favorite gym to work out in when you're in New York City?
Well, I work out at so I'm in Westchester County. I work out
Okay.
at an Anytime Fitness.
Okay.
I'm not in the city, but
Gotcha.
when I go to the city, there are several gyms that I have trained at. Since COVID, I used to kind of go into the city and just would with no colleagues of mine. I haven't done that, so I kind of am staying local now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the last question, like anything from 90s fitness culture that inspired you or still inspires you at all? Is there?
Absolutely. I mean, so I'm a product of that era in terms of my bodybuilding. I started out as a gym bro who followed all the bodybuilding routines, and I was inspired by the physiques of my favorite bodybuilders back then, starting with Frank Zane, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and progressing into especially the 90s, where we had, I don't know, this probably is certainly before your time, but Lee Labrada and Sean Ray and other bodybuilders from that era, Francois Bonfato. So yeah, they actually were who were my heroes back then, and I still remember subscribing to like Muscle and Fitness and Flex magazines and getting it delivered in the mail, and I couldn't wait to run out and rip open the plastic that it was packed in the routine. So yeah, look, I've one of my focuses, obviously, as a researcher educator, is to take the bro science, if you will, things that the gym bros are preaching, and then put it into practice. But I'll say this too: there's a lot of stuff when bodybuilders don't get big, and I mean, there are certain things, they have genetics, they do other things too, or sometimes, but they also know how to train. There's a lot to be said. So people who dismiss what bodybuilders do, I think, are really missing the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Yes, that's one of our favorite things to talk about. So thank you for being a person of real influence and evidence and just its stature in this crazy industry. We totally appreciate you being here and appreciate you being you.
And for championing women's research too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's my pleasure. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
All right, fabulous. Thank you. Okay, we're back after a little break. Congrats on getting through that, team. Good job.
Yes, go team. That was so fun though. So interesting and insightful in so many ways.
I know. I mean, and we didn't have to pay grad school tuition to get a front row seat. Like,
thank God.
Sick.
Yes.
And
Amen.
I'd like to point out that Mr. Schoenfeld did not register. He kind of inferred that we were kind of young, which is, I want to attribute that to hypertrophy.
I do think that like exercise is like a magic pill. It's the closest thing we have to a fountain of youth. Mm-hmm. That and like decent eating, like not even like great eating, like just decent. But like if you have a regular exercise I we're around so many people that work out regularly, right? And I think makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to, stay young as long as possible.
I mean, there's definitely a difference between my high school classmate, let's say, who's been smoking cigarettes for 20 years, and I've been putting time in the gym for 20 years. Like, there's a difference. Like, that's for sure. In the way that we look. So I'll die on that hill. If anybody wants to come at me, that's fine. I just said it.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think it is.
All right. We know what hill we're going to die on. Cool.
Yeah.
At
least one. There might be more hills, but that's one of them.
That's one of them. Okay. Anywho, okay. Back to range of motion.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. So interesting.
Yeah. So what comes up for me, like in the internet space of range of motion is like, I think of people like the polarity. There's always a polarity when it comes to the internet. There's the the trainers who are gonna, the very bro science forward trainers who are gonna say, you have to go full range, you know,
Right.
especially in the like strength and conditioning area, like you have to train the full range, and there's really not much exception. So that's one thing,
Yeah.
one pole. And then the other pole is, I'm thinking of like bar and,
Oh, yeah.
where it's like a lot of tiny range of motion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The glorification of like the baby
Yeah.
burn.
The baby burn. Yeah.
Yeah. Which
So-
is also very cool too. I mean,
Yeah. I'm a fan of
yeah.
the pump. I get
Well,
it.
I know, right. Those little like, but
Baby
to your
burn.
point, pull and pull, and then
Yeah.
like, what do we have all the way in between that? And like, does it have to be one or the other, or can it be all of it? And can like that be?
So I'm gonna put our version of it in
Yes, okay.
the Care Bear sphere.
Oh, love
So-
Rainbow
There's our
Bear.
90s throwback.
That is that, yeah. Like
I think it's
yeah.
80s.
80s. And then but then it came back
it's
again.
coming
I think
back,
in
yeah.
like 2017 or something.
So yeah, the math there, it works out.
It works out.
So then our version of it is the Care Bear version, where it's like it all fits into something, and
Yes.
it's there's a sequencing, and there's a, you know, there's a rationale, and you can come up with a rationale for all like different ranges at different times.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm gonna leave my Care Bear image, but
I like that.
it's above, it's exalted.
Yeah. It's like an umbrella, like
Yeah.
like casting its glory on all of us, if should we
Yes.
choose to want
So
it.
now we're
look for
coming
it.
down to the earth to give you guys the info about training different ranges of motion, not just full, not just partial, and you know, just like sprinkle that goodness on you guys. I mean, it is
Well-
pretty exciting when I can get into a zone, and it takes a little bit of creativity and trust, and finding different ranges within one setup of an exercise. That's kind of where I like to do it for myself. And I also like to do it for clients, helping, I don't do anything for my clients, but like helping them configure a set where they can use a minimal setup and use different ranges to create muscle tension in different ranges, basically in different positions. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I love that. I love, you know, that Brad's research was showing that there is absolutely benefit to training in different ranges, that, you know, if you're looking at hypertrophy only, then maybe there's this benefit to training in a lengthened position. But from a strength perspective, training through a specific range yields more strength in that specific range. So if you're only training at one end, or, you know, the lengthened end or the shortened end, you're going to get stronger in the lengthened end or the shortened end. So, you know, and if you're training full range of motion, like that's cool. Like exploring all of those things is beneficial for something, you know, whether it's strength, hypertrophy, sensation, learning, it's like how to control the weight through different, I think there's so much that goes beyond just strength and hypertrophy, even though those are like a lot of the, you know, two main goals that people come in with, but there are just so many other factors in terms of like the ability to sense and like, and control and empowered, feeling empowered. Like I know that I am in control of this weight at all, you know? So there's so much to that. And I also, though, and we had talked about this the other day, it brings up for me, we haven't really gotten into this too much in the podcast yet, I don't think, but like, we have in certain episodes, but having a good machine that allows you to explore different ranges in a way that makes sense. So like you and I were talking about like booty bands, and like sometimes that won't even like you're set with this particular tool that only, depending on its resistance, depending on its tension, only allows you, it doesn't even allow you to explore maybe. So you'd almost have to have multiple resistances, multiple tensions to work with to even like get to a lengthened range or like a really shortened range.
Mm-hmm.
And then an appropriate tension for something that is more lengthened. So then knowing what tools you have available to you and how you would, like you said, like with minimal setup or minimal, like learning how one machine could benefit you in one particular range and another machine might benefit you more in a different range. You know, those things come up for me. And also when we're talking about full range of motion, like what that means to people, because, you know, like I'm sure we've mentioned before, like, do you have to squat all the way to the ground? And like, what are we really challenging then? Like what if I'm moving
gravity?
well, right,
Yeah.
right. Like, but I'm no longer, right. It just, there's like so many different, but there are so many different things that come up, you know, with this full range, partial range thing. And I just think, I love that we started exploring it with this piece of research because it is a great like entry point into that topic that I think is could be a really huge topic.
Yeah. I think if we're going to get anywhere with that topic, I think getting a really good, solid definition of lengthened, stretch, eccentric, So what do you tell your clients? And do they ask about eccentrics or you know what I mean? Like, how do you explain it to your students in the app? Like what, you know what I mean?
No, I mean, I think, I don't really use, unless somebody would bring it up, but I don't really, you know, I might talk about like controlling it on the way down or like really trying to reach all the way to the floor. If it's like, cause like I'm sure you experience that people kind of across the board, like we all tend to cheat in the same ways. And so like the same issues can come up time and time again for people. Like if you're really trying to explore like a full range, like where are you stopping short or how are you getting there? Or like, do we want to increase the load in the eccentric phase because we could, or like what benefit could that have? Or what risk could that have depending on who the client is? Well, how about you? What do you, I mean, because I do think it would be really important to define, because those things mean different things to me. Eccentric and stretch mean two different things. And that,
it came up that proposition, like we need to like better define these things, came up as I was fielding my Instagram audience and our podcast audience on this particular guest.
Okay.
Because he's doing some of his research in, you know, intra set stretching and hypertrophy and eccentrics and hypertrophy kind of go hand in hand. So it's, you know, that came up a lot with different people. And some not in our like direct MAT, like RTS community types. Like it was on other people's minds as well.
Was the question more like about him defining those things, or was it more about like what does or the potential risk of what were the questions kind of in relation to?
Yeah, because sometimes it's really just generically used like a stretch in between sets. Like, you know, can we better just like dive into that? Like, what does it mean?
What would that look like?
Yeah, and then someone in like more like the MAT community kind of said, you know, like there's a potential benefit to the intraset stretching and hypertrophy, but what are the potential risk there too?
Yeah.
So, and it just made me think like, you know, and then it made me think about Fitness for Consumption, who's had David Boehm on, who has done multiple research studies on elongated stretching sessions.
Right.
And neurophysiology. And there's just so many different like pieces. I don't want to say components, the little pieces to our words and how we execute an exercise or give somebody instruction to execute an exercise. And that's really what comes up for me. It's like, but the other thing that came up for me is thinking about range of motion and something as common as the deadlift.
Mm.
And this is wrapped up into this conversation.
Okay.
I would, I'd a blanket statement for me on that is like a lot of people blow through their hip extension hamstring range of motion in a
Sure.
deadlift.
Sure.
And so what's their goal, right? And if it's to keep tension on the hamstrings and keep training on the next week,
Right.
why aren't we, why aren't we promoting more partial range of motion in that case for safety?
Yeah. So, well, and that's what comes up for me when I was talking about the squat thing earlier. It's like, well, what did you want to go into like lumbar flexion? Did you want that to be like the main thing that got you down to the floor? Like, is that, and then
posterior pelvic tilts?
Yeah.
Squats.
Right. I mean, but the thing with squats or with deadlifts specifically, like if you are training for a competition, you have to lift that weight off the floor. Like you can't do a partial, you know what I mean? So it's like, yes, if you're trying to keep the tension on the hamstrings or the glutes or like wherever you're trying to, whatever form you're trying to maintain. But I think for a lot of people, they could be legitimately like training for the purpose of competing.
Yeah.
And how,
well, I think like I'll indulge me and you and maybe the audience on just like what I did for my quads today, which was different ranges of motion within the same setup.
Nice.
And shout out to DMV Iron.
I need to come work out with you there.
Yeah.
Again,
I mean,
please.
man, it's such a great playground because that kind of setup can show you can devise a whole set of, I can focus on the shortened range. I can focus on the lengthened range. I can focus on the mid range, and maybe I can do all three, and some of those machines, like that's what I do is I try to do 2 to 3 different ranges within my time with that machine in one workout. So I did that today. I did my squat. They even have a safety squat bar, which is like awesome. And I bring my 10-degree prime wedges.
Nice. Awesome. Okay.
Because the ones they have there are like, it looks like a sliding board.
Yeah. Well, I want the sliding board one. Well, I know what I'm doing, but no, so a gym that I just started working out at, they have wedges, but they're separate.
Yeah.
So I get really nervous about like backing up onto them. Cause I'm like, what if I miss the wedge? Like, I like the ones that are like a little bit like just one piece. So you can just have a little more like, wiggle room.
So I think they pieced them out for kind of split squats, that type of setup.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's really what it's for. Because you're right. It is a little dangerous. But
maybe you're
stepping back on two. Yeah. No,
that makes sense.
I don't want that to go wrong. So I set that up. And 10 degrees is great for me. I don't need any more. And so, I did so for that, I'm getting a quad stretch for sure. Like I'm getting, and I'm starting my workout with that, lengthened, which is not something I would have done a couple of years ago. Like I've had to earn my my range. Let's say I earned my range. I got my badge. Maybe we could start at Girl Scouts for.
We'll start giving away peach pit badges.
I earned my badge in range of motion for squats, and that took some time for me. So what that means is, going into something lengthened at the hip and the knee, is, it's a lot, it's a big demand. And I had to make sure for me that it was safe. And now it is, and now I can recover from it and it feels good. So I had that going for my first exercise, and I paired that with Intra Set Isometrics. And that's using just the same setup, right? I have my squat rack, and there's plenty of things to push on for an isometric there. So I did hip flexion, I guess, or a rec fem type of isometric. And then on the latter half, because this is a long set, so I'm going about 6 sets in the squat rack, and for 10 reps. And it gets my heart pounding and I get sweaty. And then the latter half of that, I did glute isometrics, standing, pushing against one of the arms, or the cage arms. And then I moseyed on over to the prime leg extension, which has, multiple different cams and multiple different loading points. So I did one set at more of like a mid-range focus, and I was kind of tired after that. I did 3 sets of that, and then I did 2 sets at lengthened, which would be more like Brad's research, where I was at close, what I think would be close to 100 degrees. And what's the max knee flexion I would start in? That would probably be it for me, especially after doing those squats. Are you guys liking this play-by-play, by the way?
I feel like we should have like a board, like one of like the football board thing. Draw the players.
And then I finished off with some really it's like a standing hip machine where you have different settings, and what do people call that? A circumduction,
multi-hip.
Multi-hip.
I don't know, but that's what I've heard it called before.
So it looks like it doesn't look like any other machine in the gym. It looks like something it might be more in like you would prop up for a mechanic or something. It doesn't look like, you know what I mean? It doesn't have like a traditional gym machine look. It has like a standing area and this, anyways. So some of you might know what I'm talking about. And I did hip flexion on that. And I love getting hip flexion. I love working out hip flexion. So that's a whole nother episode. And then I did some no weight, didn't need anything at this point. So just some walking lunges on the turf.
That's
bye-bye. That was it. Home to feed the dog. And that was it. It was a great workout. So my point is, we're talking about 3 different setups, one with body weight. And in 2 of those setups, I was using different schemes of range of motion to get what I wanted done. I could go on. I posted something on Instagram with the row the other day. And I do this with lat pull downs as well, where I just change my body position a little bit, just to line things up a little differently. And I think it feels great, and I've had to earn that as well. My badge in upper body endurance and like forearm endurance, for sure, like has come a long way. So there's my badge. And, I definitely would encourage so I train with a friend sometimes. Her name's Nicole. Shout out. She definitely listens to our episodes. And and I encourage both of us to like explore different ranges. And it's it's really fun with the upper and lower body. It doesn't need to be like in research, like always, like he was talking about the tricep and the quads. There's not it's hard to study a lot of some of the bigger muscles like hamstrings, like poof. So anyways, that's my play
Well,
by play.
what I love your play by play, and what really came up for me through it, I occasionally will have people ask, like, how do you keep it from being boring? Like, what do you do when you don't have motivation, or like, what do you do like when it just feels so like repetitive and rote and blah blah blah? And I'm like, huh? Like what? But to me, that's what it is, right? It's like being curious about all of those different pieces. It could be, you could just do focusing on different ranges of motion and like changing it up in some way, shape or form, but like exploring all of those things, like is really like because it keeps you engaged. And not just like starting to think about your grocery list or whatever. Like then like, well, it would be boring if you're just like going through some motions and like, I'm doing what they told me to do in the magazine and blah, blah, blah. And like, whatever. It's like, that's what to me makes all of this like something that I do want to return to on a regular basis, is that it is, I'm finding each day what this is going to feel like. And I'm exploring a new range, or like not a new range, but like a range differently, or like, you know what, this one feels really good today. Let me just stay here and let me just like really try to engage and connect to this thing. And like, maybe another day it's like, man, I just want to like go, I just want to like get through, like not get through it, but like move like full range. I just want to, so that's what I think if you're feeling like your workout is like the same every single day, like start to see like maybe ways that you could change it up, and maybe exploring different parts of the range of motion is a way to like enter into that.
Yeah.
So,
I think so. I think that's one of my big takeaways for the audience. I mean, I think, the big takeaway for this episode was really like, I wanted to have fun with this and learn, and you all were just volunteering to watch that. That's what part of my perspective was on this. But I think the big takeaway, if like you're one of my clients or you're someone just in that boat where you are looking for more connection and more fun in your exercise, specifically resistance training and strength training, is being able to explore and have a safe place to do it is like just so incredibly rewarding. And, if you have any questions about that, I know I would love to hear from you. I'm sure you'd be open to chit-chatting to anyone about that, because those questions are so fun to watch somebody go through that, change of, wow, I really love taking care of my body from it was a chore before.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we're here to empower y'all.
Absolutely.
That's the takeaway. So we got our 90s fix, I feel like.
Yes,
I did.
Because I don't want to be on the spot for my.
I know, but
I
would love to know what the audience wants to hear about, because we've talked about so many little, things in the 90s, but there are some hidden icons that we haven't talked about, like the bicycle hats with the fucking thing that would flip the front part.
Where
that
do
would
you
flip
come
up.
up with?
I don't know. I'm just obsessed with the.
I like exhausted my 90s references like 3 episodes ago. I need to go back and explore the 90s a little bit more. I think I blocked it out.
Well, you teased me because you said you may have kept some magazines. So I'm.
I know. And now I'm
still
here.
twiddling my
So
thumbs.
let me see. I'm sure that there's somewhere. Okay. I'm going to work
so
on that.
If you guys want to be like the best, like Peach Pit, Care Bear student, Girl Scout, send us some magazines from the 90s, specifically.
Yes, if you have any like YM or like what was oh God, what did I just see one the other day? I can't remember what it was.
Well, Marie Claire's been,
starts with Sassy.
Oh my God, Sassy. I do remember Sassy.
Yes,
Sassy.
if you have any of these young, was there like young?
I don't know.
Young Miss or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The other, or like any like pop culture references that involved exercise. Like my inspiration for designing the show our theme song for this show was with my friend Darren, and I sent him the Fly Girls.
Right.
And I feel like that's not exactly a fitness reference, but J-Lo's involved.
Oh my gosh.
Biker
But, like,
shorts are involved.
dance fitness.
Dance
and,
fitness is
I mean,
involved. Yeah. So
yes.
yeah, I take that back.
Plus
So
it's just like upbeat and awesome.
yeah, it's upbeat and awesome. And it's like, I think it was just so cool because it just had this like sporty vibe and not like outwardly sexual
Mm.
vibe. And it highlighted like some real creativity and choreography versus like what a lot of other things around that time were doing, which was like it was like a lot of hypersexualization and so it just, I thought it was really cool in that way. And,
Yeah.
and I like really colorful things as well. So that hits all the marks for me.
I think it's an excellent choice.
Yes. So any of you got something there, we'd love, just send us an email. I'll send you the studio address. You can send it right there. And I think that's a wrap. And that was a fucking great show for our first one after our little break.
Yeah, I really had fun. It was so insightful and so nice of Brad to be here. And I love always talking to you. So
yes, always. Oh my gosh. Well, happy summer. Happy lots of
Happy
flowers
summer.
and sunshine to you, my dear.
And happy full moon.
Oh yeah, that's today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I got plans for you, full moon. And yeah, and thanks for being here, guys and gals and y'alls. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So bye.
Bye. Take care.